Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the English Without Borders Network Thursday webinar series. And we welcome all English Without Borders members, followers, and those who are interested in English language teaching and who want to enhance English language teaching skills and also to obtain new skills and new experience from other teachers and from other English language specialists around the globe. And today we are very happy to host Jill Tyson. She will talk about lesson plans and assessment. This is something that most of the teachers usually are very curious about, and they want to learn more about that. So, and we are very happy to see you, Jill. Welcome to the English Without Borders. Thank you for joining. And let me just give a brief introduction of our speaker today. Jill Tyson has held several positions in Kyrgyzstan since 2018 that include English Language Fellow, English Language Specialist, and English Language Consultant, and sponsored by the US Embassy in Bishkek. Currently, she's working as a virtual English Language Fellow with Lingua Foundation for Innovative Education in Bishkek. In summer 2021, she taught in a joint project that British Council and the US Embassy in Kazakhstan as an English language specialist. In 2016-2017, Jill lived and worked in Georgia as faculty in LCC International University Middle Eastern Scholars Program and as a Peace Corps response volunteer. Since 1998, Jill has taught intensive English courses during summers and winter holidays in Belarus, Lithuania, and Russia. In the US, she's been on faculty in both the English Department and English Language Institute at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga and at the Savannah College of Art and Design. So welcome again. So nice to see you. And I'm giving the floor to you, dear Jill. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome and that nice introduction. It's so great for me to be with you guys this evening. This is a fantastic project. When I looked on the website, I was so impressed and happy. My colleagues in Kyrgyzstan said hello to all of you. As Nasiba said, I've been working in Central Asia now. I'm going into the 4th academic year. So I love Central Asia. I could have never imagined myself in Central Asia just 5 years ago, but here I am in my 4th academic year. And I have not been to Tajikistan yet, but have worked in some projects with some of your colleagues. And so looking really forward to sharing and having some discussion with you about these two interesting topics, assessments and lesson planning. So I think let's get started with that. I'll share my screen. And I am okay with, and actually I would love for you to raise your hand if I can see your hand at any time if you have a question or if you want to make a comment about anything we're discussing. So today we're going to be talking about lesson planning and assessments. Oh, wow. How many of us use these books? Maybe some of us still do. Some of us have gone online, but these are our topics for today. You know, recently I bought a bicycle. And before I bought the bicycle, I did some research online. I went to several stores. I thought about the size of bicycle, the type of bicycle, even the color of the bicycle. And I really analyzed it a lot. And then after I bought my bicycle, I kept telling myself, and I still tell myself, that was a good purchase. I like the height of the bike. It's good for me. Everything is solid on my bicycle. I like the style I decided. I like the horn. I like everything about my bicycle. And so I'm really analyzing from time to time. I will think that was a good choice. And we do the same thing in life a lot. You know, if we buy a new home or if we buy a new car, we think about it a lot before. And then afterwards, you might sit with your husband or your wife and you say, you know, I'm glad we bought that car. That was a good decision. And so we're doing this all the time in our lives. And I'm just wondering, do you think it's a good idea to analyze these things like this? Do you think it's a good idea to analyze our lessons and our assessments? I think there's a raised hand. I don't know. Can people talk? Lila.
Yeah, I mean, if they raise their hand and they want to say something, or they can write in the chat box.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, do you think it's a good idea to analyze our lessons and our assessments? And if so, why? Okay. Kakub? Maybe you're just waving. So, so yes, it's a great idea to analyze. We're doing this in life. We should do it in our classroom, but we need to know why. Why are we analyzing our classes? Why do we analyze our lesson plans and our assessments? It's for two reasons. It's for growth and it's for knowledge. We want to continually know more about new methods of lesson planning and new methods of assessment. And we want to just grow in our professional development. And that's what we're doing here today. But we also want to know if our tests and our assessments are fair, are they valid? And so analyzing that, if we create a summative exam, for example, and all of our students do poorly on it, then what does that tell us? So we want to analyze and we want to think through those things.
Greetings, Jill. May I add a point to it, please?
Yes,
because
please.
I couldn't speak before.
Yes.
As you said regarding analyzing, what I feel like is important to analyze our assessments, it opens up our mind, it gives us ideas where the children are falling, where the students are lagging behind, and what kind of explanation needs a little bit more coverage. Sometimes some explanations are so simple but difficult for students to understand. And at times we got to bring them together with a daily life explanation. And it's really very simple for them to understand. For example, like I deal with primary students for English language. So when I'm explaining them, it's very difficult for them to explain them the tenses. So I ask them, what did you do yesterday? What did you do today? And what do you plan for tomorrow? The kids are so much into it. We are giving them the concept.
That's right.
So I really agree with you the way you were saying it's important. It's part of it.
Yeah, it's vital. So let's think today about 3 things we might want to learn about lesson planning and assessments. So I'm just going to be quiet for 30 seconds, and maybe you already know, maybe you don't. You can write in the chat, or you can raise your hand and say out loud 3 things you might want to learn about lesson planning and assessments. That'll help direct our conversation today.
I guess I was waiting if somebody would say, but it's like I'm speaking again. I'm sorry. I don't want to be rude.
It's okay.
Okay. So regarding the 3 things which we need to learn, I really want to learn regarding the lesson plan. It's a little different. What I want to learn is about the language lab when we are dealing with the primary language lab. So as an instructor, and giving them the skills, especially the speaking skills. Okay, kids, they got reading, writing, and listening. But I want to focus more on speaking skills so they can easily communicate with each other and give out their ideas and values which they want to share, because you see, speaking is vital for our life. So I want something in the lesson planning which I want to learn. That's why I joined over here, that I can use in my language lab for students. Though we are doing the regular thing. But
Okay.
if something is out of the matchbox, I'll be really grateful to you, dear.
Okay, great. All right. Anybody else? I think there are, yeah, to improve speaking.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Just thank you for the good and informative session. I would like to learn how the objective be achievable and very clear for the learners, and also I would like to learn that how the lesson plan, the whole lesson plan, be achievable for myself as a teacher.
Great. Achievable. Yeah. Yeah. We've all been guilty of making unachievable lesson plans for sure. Yeah, that's right. Okay, great. Well, that gives me some good things to start with. But guess what we're going to do? So our session today is about lesson planning and assessment. And starting right off the gate, I want to start with assessments, and I'll ask you why maybe I started with assessments at the end of our session today. So the first question is, what sort of assessments do you use? Let's write them in the chat or speak if somebody else wants to speak. Summative, formative. Yeah, can you say more? Because these are our these two categories. Rubrics is more specific. Questions, answers, yes. Comments, true and false. Yeah. Diagnostic test. Yes, this is good. Survey. Great. Discussion. All right. I think there's a raised hand. Matching. Wow. Yeah. What about checklists? Do any of you use checklists? Checklists are popular. Yes. Okay, great. Yeah. What about peer assessments? I haven't seen that yet. Does anyone use a peer assessment?
Yes, Nadia has written that peer assessment.
Oh, great. Yeah. How do you use peer assessments in your class? Natia, if you can share. Oh, you also wrote self-assessment. Yeah, that's great. Okay, yeah, I also wanted to see, or I want to ask you if anybody uses portfolios. Maybe not so much. Yes. Yeah. So rubric ready, and they just fill it. Okay, this is great. Yeah. Well, you guys are using a big variety of ways to assess your students, and so there's for the formative, the assessments that are for learning, and then summative, the assessments that are of learning. But we're assessing our students even when we're observing our students. This is also a form of assessment when we're taking down notes about particular students and taking notes of the ones that are active and the ones that seem a little bit lost. All of this data collection is also a way to assess our students. So students can also self-assess, and it's not so common for students to self-assess in traditional education, but now we are really trying to help our students to think more about their thinking. And in this process of being cognitive about the thinking, which is metacognition, in this process, if we have students to stop for a minute and ask themselves if they understand this material, This is a very helpful way for them to be able to know if they actually could teach the material or actually they have mastery of the material. And in peer assessments too, you have to teach students how to assess one another. And you can use a rubric or a checklist with that, but it's also a process. Yeah. So there was a question there about self-assessment. Portfolios are really a great way too. Portfolios can be done like one of two ways. You can have a portfolio where it shows samples of all the work, like the first work, and then progressively through the year, or it can be a portfolio of only the best work. So you can do a portfolio that shows the improvement from the first of the year until the end of the year. So it has some work that's not from September and October. And then it goes all the way and you can see the line, hopefully, of improvement. But you can also have a portfolio that just showcases the very best work. So there are so many different ways that we can assess our students. But the most important things are that our assessments are accurate for measuring the learning. We want to make sure that what we're testing matches up with what we taught. So it needs to be accurate. You can't ask your students to spell the planet names in English if you haven't taught them how to spell the planet names. You have to match the assessment with what you want to measure for learning. Secondly, our assessments have to be bias resistant, and I'll talk more about this in a little while, but those of us who are giving grades for homework, we need to really think about this because some students have internet connection at home, and some students have parents that help their children with the homework, or they at least give them incentives to finish their homework, and other students don't. And when we're giving grades for homework, this has a potential to be a little bit biased. So we need to make sure that we're considering all of those factors. Maybe some of your older students have jobs, or they have parents or siblings that they have to care for. So thinking about this and being as bias resistant as you can be in all of your assessments needs to be taken into consideration. And then thirdly, our assessments need to be motivational. Yeah, motivational. And I don't mean like, I'm so scared that I'm going to study and so I can make 100%. I don't mean that kind of motivation. I mean that when a student gets their results from your summative, from all of their assessments, that they understand that they can master this material even if their grades aren't that good. And one thing I like to do is, if you have a unit and it's, let's say it has 8 lessons, or you're planning for 8 class sessions, that maybe you can give that summative assessment on the 7th session. Why? So that on the 8th session, you can talk about the test. How many of us talk about the test? Not very many usually. And this, if we use an assessment to be motivational, to say you can do better, and we can go over the answers together, that can help the student prepare for the next unit, because our topic, English, it builds on one another. If your students don't really get the time phrases, or they don't get the adverbial phrases, then they won't be able to master. They'll feel a little bit weaker going into the next unit. And so when we take some time to gently talk about our assessments, it's very motivational for our students, and it helps them to want to do better. So we know, and we've talked about like the fact that our formative assessments are what we're doing, looking around the class, making sure students are on task, making sure that they're all active. We're assessing them for learning. When we ask a question and all of our students go, we know we probably need to repeat the question, right? We probably need to go over that material when we ask on an exit ticket. If our students have understood the material, we ask them some questions to help understand that, and they look confused. Then we know we need to revise. We know that we need to go back. And our assessments of learning are our summative exams. So again, when we test fairly, we create for IELTS and for TOEFL, we create a controlled environment, right? We try to make the tables look beautiful with flowers maybe. We do what we can to have a calm environment, but we need to really think that our assessments need to go a little bit deeper. And it needs to talk about a little bit about what is going on in the background with our students. And back to the thing I said before, just we don't know what the factors are. So we need to make sure that our assessments are bias-free and give everyone an equal opportunity to do well. So how should we assess? And the answer is easy for that. It's use the method that measures best the learning objectives. We need to get our students, we know that for listening, we do things like dictation, we do cloze exercises, we do TPR, we do minimal pairs and debate. And for reading, sometimes we use journaling. We use reading response. We draw pictures that show comprehension. We do acting out and role play, open book assessments where students can go back and look at the text, interviews with partners, and active reading and thinking. We do these assessments when we have reading tasks. And then with our productive tasks with speaking and writing, we use rubrics and checklists. Rubrics are very popular. Everyone uses rubrics. It became popular, several years ago. In my experience, students like checklists better. Rubrics are great, but when I use them, I use the very simple single point rubric where there's just a column in the middle, and either they met or exceeded or they need work. And it makes it much easier, because I think sometimes we need to really consider the cognitive load that we put on our students when we hand them a complicated rubric. So be sure when you use rubrics that they're easy to understand. We all have so much we can take into our brain. And if our students are struggling with the way that their assignments are going to be assessed, then that pulls from the cognitive load and it makes things a little more confusing for them. So the easier the assessment can be to understand and that we can give beforehand, the better. So some other things that we do when we're assessing productive skills are interviews, group discussions, videos, skit, and presentations, or teaching the skill explicitly, and then using like a model or a portfolio of the writing, like I said before. Yeah. Back to portfolios. I really love portfolios. I don't know if you guys can do this in Tajikistan. It's kind of hard to do, but my daughter, one of my daughters went to an art school, and every quarter It was her job to meet with me, the mom, and the teacher. So the three of us met, and my daughter had to show me her portfolio. And she needed to tell me why she was doing great in English and not so great in math. She had to explain to me all of her topics, all of her subjects using her portfolio. And I thought it was very clever then, and I think that it's very clever now, to have students be able to verbalize what they think their own learning struggles are and where they're succeeding. This again, like, goes towards what we're looking for to create in our learners. We want them to think about their thinking. We want them to be able to state what their problems are. Sometimes if you just say, do you have any questions? If a student is confused, they don't even know what question to ask. And so we have to be really careful with that. And we need to make sure that our students know how to verbalize where they are struggling, so that then you can reach down, you can help them and bring them to a level of mastery, even if your lessons are scaffolded or differentiated for your class. Self-assessments are really interesting. If a student stops and asks, how am I doing? Can I do this work? Why or why not? And what sort of support do I need? We can help our students by asking them to ask themselves these questions. They can call out to you for help, or you can put them in a group. So I'm looking at the chat, and students record themselves and listen, and asking students about their own assessments. It becomes really meaningful when they think about the grades. I might say this again because I think it's so important. Remember, you're not a math teacher, and throw the numbers out of your classroom. I think that it would go so far if we could throw the numbers out of our classroom, because our students are thinking, oh, if I could just make a 10, or if I just make 100. Why don't your students say, if I can just write a narrative paragraph, if I can just get that verb tense down? You see, let's remember what we're teaching. We're not teaching points, we're teaching English. And we want our students to always remember that, those English mastery goals. And this comes, I think, to something that was mentioned before, that you want to know about lesson planning and assessments. Students need to stay cognitive of what it is they're doing. And one way we can do that, I call it a brain dump. And it's just when students are working in groups or individually, just have them stop. Just tell them all for a few minutes, stop what you're doing, put your pencils down. What are we doing now? Why are we doing this? And you'll be surprised at the answers. Students, sometimes they get so wrapped up in either a project or like writing sentences or words, or they get so wrapped up in doing something, they forget why they're doing it. We do that too, but in the classroom, it's more about the students. And if we stop and ask them why, sometimes that really helps. Group work and peer assessments are so interesting. Anytime, I know project-based learning is very interesting too now, and very popular now. And I love project work for so many reasons. I think project work is a very efficient way to get all 4 skills in, and really raise the level of motivation of your kids in your class, as long as the project is very motivating and relevant to their lives. But in all project work, I have students to write personal contribution statements. So they need to write how they're contributing to the success of the project. That means no student gets to be lazy. You see, there are 2 things. There's cooperation and there's collaboration. So we can cooperate together that I do all the work. You see, that's easy. Cooperating with a group, it's not a problem. But when you change that word to collaborate, then somebody needs to do something different than this person, and someone else needs to do something different than that person. So all of that, all the players in the group have to be working. They have to be working, or the whole project is not successful. So everyone has a role, and students all need to be able to write or to say, what is my personal contribution? So if it's just a short project or short group work in class, then they can say after. And maybe if it's a longer project or something that's going to last for several class periods or even a couple of weeks, you could have them do a personal contribution statement, just maybe just one or two throughout the length of the project. So this is also a very good way for students to self-assess working in groups. And these checklists or rubrics for group tasks and peer checks are very important. And just making sure the work is getting done, the learning is happening, and helping students to be able to see it better and be more aware of it, it's really good. And then also exit tickets. Exit tickets can be so simple. They can be even things like, the things that you see on the screen. Another thing could be just, have students to shut their books and to shut their notebooks. And you can just ask all the students to write 4 new vocabulary words they learned today. And then they can go. Or write 2 sentences using the grammar structure that we talked about today. It's easy. Just give students a little task before they go, and that will assess immediately. You'll be able to see what your students took and what they didn't take. This is also called retrieval practice. And retrieval practice is very good for helping students to know what they don't know and what they do know very quickly. A retrieval practice is what you do when you're just pulling something out of your brain. So I'm studying Turkish right now. And in the evenings when I do my homework, before I open my book, I write down the new vocabulary that I'm learning, either from class or on the street or something. I'm writing down the new vocabulary. Why? Because I'm retrieving. I'm trying to pull it from my brain. A lot of times students will open their book. They think they're studying, but they're just rereading things that they already know, but they're not, the learning isn't happening. But when you pull it from your brain, when you're not looking at a hint, then this is knowledge, and this is how we solidify knowledge, and this is how we get better at learning. Check the chat really quick. Yes, I agree with all of that. So what we do is, when we're talking about lesson planning, we're usually, most teachers are pretty good at scaffolding the lessons for the students who are more active and a little bit less active or need more support. So why don't we scaffold our assessments to do the same? Because remember, I said one of the things that we really want our assessments to be is fair, and motivational. And so our students can feel motivated if the exams and the pieces of knowledge that they need to take, it might be a little bit slower than their classmates, but if they can feel a little bit of mastery, then it's great. You know what we do a lot? We polish the shiny apples. So if we have smart students, we have students who come into our class and they're so sharp and everyone thinks they're smart and on the ball and active. And then they leave our class and they're the same way, and they know more because they're very active, and they look great and they're making all the best grades. What is happening to the other students? So when you take the other students and you move them also in mastery, even if it's a little bit slower, this effort is what we want to really reward. This effort is what we really want to like show is important. It's the process of learning that's important. In the end, yes, a lot of times we have to have those top grades to get into the best universities, to get a free place, or to go on to be certain professions. You need that. But there's only a small percentage of our students who are going to always just get that. And what is happening to the rest of the students? Our goal as teachers needs to be also like helping our students who are in the middle or a little bit weaker to also feel to feel affirmed in the effort that they make. Because if they're not getting affirmation, it's not motivating, guys. If every single time everything I do is just normal, I don't have any, I'm not seeing improvement with my grades, then I'm eventually going to get really tired of it and I'm going to just check out. And so helping our students and giving them the support that they need is really important in our assessments. Yeah, so this is just an example slide. I'm going to skip that. Yeah, so teach students about homework this way, I think. Homework is like the practice before the game, you know. A lot of you watch soccer and football, and you know, what's the team doing right now? Like they're probably out on the field practicing. You know, they're not playing the game, they're practicing. Well, that's what homework is. That's what homework is. That's where we're supposed to be a little bit messed up, you know. That's where, like, if I have a question, you know, that like I need to ask it in class the next day. So again, you know, a lot of teachers do grade homework. And of course, students need to participate and they need to try, and, you know, but we need to measure the learning, that's the English language learning. So we need to remember, you know, when we're having fair assessments, just because someone brought the homework, you know, every day, you know, they're bringing the homework, that shows that they're participating. So if they're participating, it's enough. It's enough if they're trying to do their homework every day. But if their homework isn't all correct, that's okay. That's okay. If you go over it in class, or they can share with a friend, or they can ask questions and get and revise the homework and complete the homework. So it's fine. Homework is the practice before the game. Yeah. Also, you know, students do need to really respect you guys as teachers. Nobody likes to be in a class of naughty children or children who are misbehaving. But let's be careful again about what we're assessing in our classroom. Children need, or our students, they need to bring the materials to class. They need to participate. But when we add these skills into our grades, sometimes it's misrepresented how they're doing in their English language learning. So be careful to separate. I mean, most of us have, like, you know, behavior grade, and then we have the English language, you know, we have our grade for the material, the content. But just be careful that we're not like holding biases against some students when we're thinking about grading. So our grade should reflect what our students know. Not all the stuff that they do, their behavior necessarily, their privilege or their homework. Let's keep that in mind. So I'd like to ask you to interrogate your own assessment practices. And like, what are you counting? You know, what are you counting? Are you counting some things that maybe you shouldn't be counting? So just be attentive. So there's a lot of information there. I just like ran through a lot of stuff about assessments. And so we're going to do questions later, but I just wonder why we started with assessments. Maybe you wonder the same thing. We started with assessments because if we know where we're going, then it's better when we plan our trip, right? We don't set off on family vacation without knowing where we're going. And our assessment should tell where we're going. Okay, we talked about that in the beginning. Our assessment should very closely match the learning that should be happening in our classroom. So if we know what our students should know, and all you have to do is not look, if you just look at the page you left off on, which is how some teachers plan their lesson, they say, oh, we were on page 17, so today we're going to start on page 17, and that's how they plan their lessons. But if instead you look at the goals and you look at what the learning objectives are for the book, it tells you about the learning objectives in the front or the back of the book, somewhere in your textbook. And if you look at what the goals are first, then it helps you plan all the activities and tasks and projects, and everything that you do in class is going to be so much more efficient. We want to make sure we connect this learning for our learnut so that they really understand what we're doing. And one way to do this is to put it on the board, to put on the board every day, like what it is you want your students to go away with. Many of you have heard about the KUD, and K stands for know, U is understand, and D is do. So knowing is just facts. Knowing is just knowing the facts, and that those are things that you want your students to do. They're part of your lesson. But understanding is how those facts actually connect with other and prior knowledge, with something in the student's life. And then the do part is like the Bloom's verbs. What do you want your students to be able to do at the end of that? So my question is, how do you typically plan a lesson? Oh, before we go there, have you shared Bloom's with your learners? Why not, is my question. We use Bloom's because those are things we want. Those are the action verbs. When we're planning a lesson, that's what we want our students to be able to do. Those are the behavioral objectives. Why don't we share? Why don't we share those with our students? Because you know what? They can understand them. And when they know, what it is, what it is you want them to do, this is the thing that they need to be thinking of. Oh, once I'm able to do this, I will have mastered this concept. So sharing Bloom's with your students is a really nice idea. Yeah, somebody said that they know the stages, and that's really good. Yeah, because then too, when you share Bloom's, you can say, guys, we're working here now, but my goal is to get you here. You can show them visually, like where they're working on a particular project and where you want them to go. Guess what? That's motivating. And why wouldn't we do it if it motivates our students? So, question, how do you typically plan a lesson? I'll say, let me read the chat and see if starting from writing objectives. Okay, great. Yes, all right. Starting from writing objectives is usually what we do first. And then second, a lot of teachers just plan a bunch of activities around the theme. So if you're going to study, let's go back to planets, for example. If you're going to study planets, they think of something fun that they can do about planets. It'll teach them in English, the names of the planets and some words related to space. and then they have an exam. But let's talk for a few minutes about backwards planning. So typically when we plan a lesson, we think about the objectives, then we think of these tasks, and then we have an exam. But with backwards planning, we do a couple of those steps a little bit backwards. So what we do is we first, after we set our objectives, and we name very clearly with SMART goals and SMART planning what we want our students to know and understand and do. This is part of the learning cycle. Then we want to know how we're going to assess. What sort of assessment is going to be at the end? And this is where this is changed. This is a little bit changed. So instead of starting with the title and topic, we start with the end goal, and we look at the standards. We look in our books at the end of our book, or in the beginning in the contents, where we see like what are the standards here? What are the learning goals? And we start with that, and then we can tailor all the tasks and activities to what it is we're going to measure. So number 2, instead of talking about teaching plans in terms of topics, we're going to be teaching in terms of objectives and goals. So maybe we're teaching students how to write a descriptive paragraph. So instead of talking about, instead of saying, oh, our theme is travel in Tajikistan, beautiful cities in Tajikistan. Instead of talking about this topic, say we're learning how to write a descriptive paragraph through the topic of travel in Tajikistan. You see, it puts a different perspective on it, because if you keep in mind what is your teaching goal, then you can do that on a lot of different topics. So it gives a new perspective on that. So instead of keeping students just busy with content, giving them just busy work and things like that, then you plan your assessments with a rubric or some other measuring tool that's going to meet those benchmarks. So students are always working with either a checklist or a rubric, or looking on the board to see that the objectives are clear and they know the learning goals for this class or for this unit. They're always knowing it. When they always know it, they're always going to be reaching for it. And so instead of planning activities that cover the topic, we also want to plan for activities that directly help them succeed and meet these benchmarks. We want them to get to this place. And so this is backwards design. You kind of look at it this way. The first step is identifying what students should know, how you want them to connect it. That's the understand part. And then what can they do, the behavioral. So we have, 2 sets of objectives. We have cognitive objectives and we have behavioral objectives. And the cognitive objectives are the know and understand. And then the behavioral is the things that they can do at the end of the lesson. So that's what we do first. And then after that, we think about the assessment. How are our students going to show me that they understand, they know and understand and can do these things? And so you think about the assessment first, and then after that, you can fill in with anything. You can fill in, the tasks and activities that are going towards that goal. Yeah, presentation. Yeah, the PPPs, yes. Yeah, we can use that. So sometimes planning those activities is kind of a distraction, but what I'd like to ask you to do is start thinking about what you want your students to think about. Start thinking about it that way, and then that'll make your lesson planning easier and better. So there are all kinds of frameworks for setting up lesson planning. So this framework is called depth of knowledge, and maybe you've seen it. It's just one framework. There's so many frameworks, And not one is really better than the other. You need to find the one that works well for you. But planning a lesson is not looking at the page you finished yesterday. Planning a lesson needs to be really strategic. Universal design is another. So planning backwards is one way. Universal design is another way. Depth of knowledge is another way. There's so many different ways to plan lessons that are all really, really good. So I love backwards planning. I think it's the most efficient way to plan in my practice, I think. Just knowing where you want to go by the end of the lesson is really good, but also just making sure that you're going through the stages of learning is great too. So that's what I have today in our short time. We couldn't get too much into too many of the topics, but if there's some questions, let's go back to any of those and explore more.
Yeah, we had a couple of questions while you were presenting. We have got questions from the audience. So a question from Arzi Tajizi: how we assess peer assessment after the class or during the class?
How do you assess a peer assessment?
How we assess peer assessment after the class or during the class. So the peer assessment is taking place during the class or after the class?
Well, the peer assessment itself can happen at any time. If it's a group project, it might very well happen outside of class time. But if it's happening in class time, the peer assessment itself is the assessment. So you shouldn't have to, if you teach your students how to assess each other, and you shouldn't have to assess the peer assessment. So for example, if they have a checklist, and each member of the group is supposed to like go through the checklist on the other's paper, for example. Maybe they've written a paragraph. So what you might do is in a small group, you can have students together. First, let's say it's my turn. Okay, we're in a small group and I wrote a paragraph. So I first will tell you what I think my problems are in my paragraph, or what I like about my paragraph, and then I'll read it to you. And then you guys take notes or check if we're looking for, you know, certain elements, if those elements are there. Then after I finish reading, all of my peers in my group can share comments about my paragraph. And I listen to those, and this is how I revise my paragraph. This is how I make it better. This is how I know it needs to change. Or if I know I'm on track and I'm doing a really nice job, then I know that. And then I can say how I want to change my paragraph, and it moves to the next participant in the group. So this is like a peer check activity that's happening like in the classroom. This is just one example, but this in itself is, I mean, this is the assessment, you know, like this is the assessment. So it doesn't need to be assessed.
Thank you, Jill. A question from our very active participant, Judith Allett, a Fulbright scholar. So how do you convince students of the importance of revealing their mistakes? Because that's when the teacher can understand what they don't know.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, revealing their mistakes. I mean, it's kind of, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, because like in open class, admitting, you know, students won't want to do that. They won't want to do that. And but in private and in a, you know, teacher student conference, Of course, you can talk about that. But yeah, revealing the mistakes, like if you're going over homework, for example, you don't have to really, it's not necessary in homework for the teacher to know like all the wrong answers that some students got. You can see that in other things. You can see that in other ways once you ask students to produce something. So you do a homework. So for example, on time expressions, and then you check it in class, and students are taking notes and they're correcting their papers. And then you ask them to produce. You ask them, okay, what time is it? Write it on your paper. Here's number 1. You do like 10. If a student doesn't do well after that, then there's the assessment, and that tells you. But I know in a lot of traditional education that it's very clear, it's open, like who was making good grades, like the test scores are publicized, and this is difficult. It's difficult for students, and it's demotivating, guys. I mean, I've seen students cry when I was working in Georgia in 5th grade. I've seen students cry, and we don't want to make our students cry. I mean, if you make our students cry, like they were not going to like English, so.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, assessment is a really tough process. It's both, I think, for teachers and students as well, right?
Yes.
Because for teachers, the more you teach, the more experienced you become, the more you know that, I mean, any contributions that the students have made, they should be assessed and they should be acknowledged, right? Their work should be acknowledged.
Yeah.
So there is another question from the Facebook followers. What are the challenges for assessing the productive skills, especially writing and speaking?
Yeah. So the productive skills, writing and speaking, I mean, they're difficult, but at the same time, they're really fun. Let me unmute. Yeah, so the productive skills are here. Let me go back. Yeah, here. So with assessing productive skills, these, I think, checklists are really good. And they just need to be clear. If you're going to do an oral presentation, you need to ask, if you have a democratic classroom where you're asking students, okay, so we're discussing the parts of the body, and you're going to make a oral presentation about that. What things should we include in our assessments? And so maybe looking at the audience is one. So have students help you to build this checklist or this rubric, and then you can assess those things. I mean, based on what you want students to know and be able to do. If you want students to be able to maintain eye contact, then this needs to be on the rubric or on the checklist. But if it's not so important, then you don't need to put it there and assess it. You might want students to be able to name in their oral work at least 10 vocabulary words. So that needs to be on the rubric or checklist.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Jill, for the answers. This might be the last question. What can you do to avoid exposing students when assessing them in groups? I really don't, maybe Fernando was missing something. What can you do to avoid exposing students when assessing them in groups?
Yeah, I think the self-assessment is the ticket for that. Having students be responsible to the group. And just another word about group work too, guys, is especially like during the pandemic, but a lot of research has been done about like the efficiency of group work and projects. And even during the pandemic, Harvard University confirmed some studies that showed that when students are, if you have a class of students and you put them in groups, and they're working in their groups for the whole year, a group maybe of 4 students or 5, this is more motivating for students, because then the student doesn't feel only responsible to you. It's not just like I need to do the grades for the teacher, for myself, but for just one, but they're also responsible more for their group. And that's more motivating. And so it's in a lot of research, and I really highly recommend, like this time of year is a really good time if you haven't assigned groups, not to do it in September when school starts, because you don't know your students. But once you understand your students in October, early November, it's a good time to like make groups for, like, for example, writing groups. You want these groups to always be peer checking each other. And you know your students by now, and so you can make groups. You can even use the groups for homework checks, So, but when you're doing group work, every member in projects, they need to have some sort of like way to state how they're contributing, what they did, and that can help the group as a whole to also just be more honest about the contribution. It's more motivating too.
Thank you, Jill. I know it's time, but questions are coming, and there is a question which is really interesting. I cannot leave it. So maybe this is the last question. Mm-hmm. So how trustful those self and peer assessments are? Do they really do the job?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. All the questions are great, by the way, but this is a really good question because it when students are peer assessing, we hear it often that they're all complimenting their group, because they definitely don't want to make enemies. But if we talk to our students and we teach our students that this is a way to really understand how like they're learning, and to really push each other, it becomes more like a team. And so when it becomes more like a team, then other students really want to help, either like explain some homework. You see, this kind of mentoring, like we know that it works really well with teachers, like when more mature teachers like talk to and share materials with younger teachers, or with teachers who are not so experienced. But when we get into the language classroom, we somehow kind of forget about that we really need, like, it's very good for active students. They know the material, and when they teach it to a classmate who is understanding a little like in a different way, or understanding a little bit slower, when they teach it, then they know it better. And the less active student, and then I'm just calling that for just the term, the student who is falling a little bit behind or needs a little boost, a little extra support, then they're working together, and then this student is coming up and learning like to trust in his class. All of these things are team building. There's 21st century skills. These are things that they're going to need like when they finish your English classroom and in life, because we're working together in teams and building teams all the time. So it depends on how it's set up. Because if you just say, okay, like, if you're not being attentive with it, then it's not very effective. But you need to really teach your students the value of working together and what it really means in real world. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we should use this terminology like peer assessment, but not telling the students. Students just need to know that they're doing kind of team building, and they're doing kind of collaboration, right?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jill, for really interesting and great session for English Without Borders. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Jill. It was indeed very interesting and very motivating as well as engaging webinar. So, and dear audience, I think that you are really looking forward to receive all those presentations and like useful links that shared by Jill. So we'll post them on our website very soon next week. And thanks again, Jill. Hope this will be the start point of our collaboration, and we'll be having more webinars in the future together with you. And yeah, we'll be very delighted to host you in Tajikistan once you come. And please do plan to come to Tajikistan. And yes, and we'll be very happy, yes, to link you with English language teachers in Tajikistan who will definitely benefit from this collaboration with you.
Perfect. I love these opportunities so much. And I thank you again. You know, like we just took a whole semester worth of material, actually maybe 2 semesters with assessments and lesson plannings, and we crammed it into 40 minutes and just, you know, an hour. And so with any one of these topics, we can talk on and on and on. But I hope like there are at least a few things you can take away and think about. Thank you again so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you very much.